So my first question, it's been a decade since we had the original roundtable discussion. How are you feeling? What came from that? What would you like to revisit? Or challenge?
Well, I just wanted to say it's beautiful to be back in the space, and I want to name and honor Grace's presence and absence. And I feel like, it's been an interesting thing to be living in a decade where she was here and then she's not here, but she's here and she's very present in my thinking and my life. And I feel like every day there's a reason that I can reference her, either publicly or privately. And in that conversation, it felt like one of the first times for me that I was like, as long as people are alive, you can be in a dynamic conversation with them, right? And in this past decade, I've published several books, and my placement in movement has shifted a lot, like where I sit. And I feel like Grace has been such a good model of and stay in conversation. Don't go so far in any direction that you can't still be in a conversation and learning and shaped and moved and changed. And then I also want to say, for me, it's been a really exciting decade. I got to put out this project called Emergent Strategy, which feels like it really speaks to a lot of what Grace and what we were talking about in that first conversation around how do we have movements that spark from multiple places and where lots and lots of people feel responsible for growing them. And how do we understand that as something that particularly women's leadership is bringing into the center of how movement can build or grow. And I feel like that, for me, Emergent Strategy is my active practice of that. I'm there's more and more to say about it, but I'm if I think about it as, this is a decade of growth and time, it's been a decade for me of experimentation. It's been a decade of trying to live into being in conversation with people like Shay and Ginny and Grace and now Tawana and the Mama and Nev, and is being the many ways that we think, the many ways that we're trying to understand the world are all relevant ways to understand the world. And I think I've left this decade a lot of my insecurity about the ways that I think are the ways that I move in the world, and just been it's okay, there's many ways. And mine is a good way, and there's many ways. Yeah.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Also, you had a really cute baby. I feel like that's the important thing that happened in this decade that changed the world and changed everything.
Right.
So
Blew me and changed me. And
so did Jenny.
Yes. New babies.
Radical transformation.
Really radical
transformation. About feminism.
Exactly.
But that is one thing I have thought about, just looking from when we were together and now. There's not that we haven't all been together in various formations, but I really appreciated the opportunity to just reflecting on that collection. I mean, Grace had been very present and then left us in 2015.
Yeah.
You had a baby.
Yeah.
Jenny and Nate have had a baby, and Tawana's baby has become a grown-up.
Yes.
You are now a grandmother of a college student, and you birthed 2 new books.
Yes, and you put out books.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a booky time for almost everyone this came into.
True that.
But,
Yes.
But
It's Tawana.
Very
Yeah.
productive
yeah, but 2
time.
things I have thought about on the positive side of this decade is, in the last conversation, I was very concerned about how do we move from these small things to a larger, stronger presence. And I feel that that's happened in a lot of ways over this decade. I mean, there's the intellectual presence that has come through your work and your work and your work in terms of getting ideas out there. There's kind of an institutional presence. We have now the Allied Media Project
Yes.
giant frame.
Behemoth.
The behemoth, really, serious. I mean,
Yes.
there's been such a change, both not only in terms of the conference, but in terms of this whole conceptualization of digital justice
Yeah.
and the digital stewards.
And being less afraid of being big. I
Yeah.
feel like in that period, there was such a question of like, oh, how do we do that?
Yeah.
And the answer is sort of like, oh, we have to stop being scared of scaling up.
Scaling
like
up,
when
yeah.
we do have stuff. I feel like Allied Media, the scaling up process has been like, this is not easy, but
Yeah.
we're not scared either.
Yeah, and we have the Bog School
Oh,
that didn't
yes.
exist. I mean, it was still just a dream, and now
Wow.
here it is in that decade.
That's
So
awesome.
those are the kinds of things that I think where we have seen creativity and connection both happen, and so that's been really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
What has the decade felt like for you, Mom and
Very full. Yes. Yeah, publications, not only my own, but as a part of Broadside Lotus Press, putting out the winning books, right? Each year, the Naomi Long Award, a winning book. So, that pressure. Being involved with Riverwise, doing the CRC, that's the We the People collective, research collective, right? Well, and half of the decade I was still working at U of M Dearborn, so there was all the stress of that academic environment and trying to keep the African American Studies department up and running against a lot of negativity from the rest of the faculty. So yeah, very, very busy and very tiring, but also fulfilling, right?
Yeah.
And rewarding, especially with the water book.
Mm-hmm.
That project has just been, so useful in so many different settings. And of course this, the number of children who passed through, and the kind of collective bonding that has taken place among a very diverse collection of people, diverse racially, diverse generationally, and coming from so many different perspectives. So it's been full and stressful and overwhelming, but good for the most part. Feel good about it.
All of the things that people have named, I think from this vantage point, it feels to me like there's so much more, like the ecosystem of organizing here is so much more vast and deep and varied than it was in 2010. And that might just be just like my limited view, but it feels like so much grew in the past 10 years. Even especially I think for people organizing amongst like our generation, we're like all roughly but I think thinking back to that time, it was like
The teens to 20s.
yeah, like there wasn't, there was like the elder generation that we were all looking up to and kind of being mentored by, and then there was like a smaller, it was sort of like Detroit summer and pockets, and now there's so much, and I think like you mentioning like We the People in the Water book, like I think that's a pivotal thing in my mind too around the last decade of just like how the water crisis and like that kind of global, like making all these ties globally through your work and like and then Flint and all that stuff, it just felt like the organizing work in Detroit becoming so much more enmeshed with global struggles around fundamental rights like water. And then I think personally, 2010 me, I guess 27-year-old me. Oh yeah, so that would have been like I was on the verge of my Saturn returns.
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
Yes.
About to break up from a 10-year-long relationship.
Yes.
Oh yes.
That happened about 10 years ago.
That was a big deal.
we had founded the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition, and we were kind of like very in a fantastical vision, like, oh, maybe we'll like, wrangle that federal money, and instead of it going to these fucked up corporate actors, we're gonna like have it go into grassroots media, community media making and technology, and never really thought that would happen. But then that happened, and that kind of set things off down a wild path. Yeah, and I think like it has felt like a period of time in which this challenge of like how to approach resourcing of our work, that has been a question the past 10 years I feel like I've been trying to answer. And in that moment in 2010, I remember us like constantly saying, you know, it was all, we were just like, any talk of foundations would be like, well, you've been like systematically ignoring, underfunding, denying any like resourcing of grassroots organizing here, and that is a shift that I think has occurred in that there, you know, there's millions more that should be spent, but I think the way that deep community organizing is being resourced is different now as a result of a lot of the work.
So I'd like to just say, first give honor to you all who were clearly engaged in social justice long before that was a part of my world. I mean, I was like a radical poet in elementary school writing about like crooked politicians.
That's right.
Long story, but that was beaten out of me, you know, through like this sense that you couldn't be a poet. Like that wasn't a thing you could go pursue.
Yeah.
If you wanted to eat. And then also growing up in a city where my entire childhood I was taught to get out of here. Like you just grow up and you get out of Detroit. Detroit is not the place that you thrive or learn or create or contribute to. And so I went that trajectory. I pursued corporate America. I went and got the good job they tell you you're supposed to have, and something, the artist in me was in constant struggle with that person. Like I was at work writing poems, you know, and getting in trouble, even as a boss, you know. So it's like my whole computer was full of like poetry. And so I just remember a moment of it being enough. And, you know, there are a lot of chipping away moments that happened, but there was that one moment that I had to walk off. And I want to say it was like 2007 maybe, where I think the conversation about like Barack Obama potentially becoming a president happened. And then I saw like racism in a way that I had never personally recognized. I can't say, I have consciousness now, so I can't say that I hadn't experienced it, but I hadn't recognized it. And so I remember walking into my job one day and going like, where the hell am I? Like I knew it didn't feel good, but whoa, it really doesn't feel good. And so leaping from corporate, having a almost 6-figure salary, having like 4 weeks vacation and crap ton of money, and then trying to figure out where to take my poetry and consciousness. It was rough. It was very rough. And so when I came into this network of people, and I was like, wow, I'm not like alone. You know, there are other people who like don't think that the corporate job is the answer, or that there are actually solutions we can create. And so, and there's a different narrative of Detroit, which I had never experienced. And so, it hasn't been that long ago where I have had a sense that this is a place of hope and creation and co-creation and vibrancy. And it hasn't been that long that I've had pride in Detroit, because it was so many decades of hearing otherwise and being taught otherwise. And so, so I just want to lift that up, that the work that was done before I came into this space held me even through difficult and challenging times. I'm not going to romanticize being in social justice space, but the fact that you all are willing to keep coming to the table and like thinking and struggling and like and have a pride in Detroit that a lot of people in the world don't is important. And so so the last decade for me has been a first.
That's beautiful.
You know, so